And we are live on YouTube. Let me start the recording on my end. Record on this computer. And we are live. This is the Male Entrepreneur Podcast, episode number 148. And we are live in 3, 2. All right. Welcome back to the Male Entrepreneur Podcast, the podcast for men who win, with your host, Purdeep Sangha. Purdeep, how you doing, man?
I'm doing awesome, man. I'm ready to rock it out.
Okay, so last week we ended the show talking about your new book, and you had a physical copy, and we were just talking, and you said that you've also got an audio version coming as well.
Yeah, I'm super excited about that because I spent 3.5 days locked up in my office, literally, with my office. If you can't see this, I had, my entire office was filled with blankets and pillows, and it was like a lockdown. I had to send my family away, so my kids and my wife off to my mother-in-law's for the long weekend, and I literally just recorded it out. It was an interesting experience, I have to say. I always wanted to do the audio book, but I just never. It was a little bit daunting to me because, first of all, I'm like, would anybody want to listen to me speak for 7-8 hours straight? I personally wouldn't. So for those of you out there listening to this podcast, thank you, for putting up with my voice. But it was just interesting because I was like, when I speak, in all honesty, Nathan, there's sometimes where I just mispronounce things and I skip words, and I don't even know because my brain's just, somewhere else. And so I was like, I'm just going to screw this entire book up. I know it. Like, I'm just going to be sitting here and it's going to take me forever. I'm going to spit out all these random words. So I hired a professional team to help me out, but it was a great experience, I have to say. For the next book I write, and I'll probably write one next year, I'm going to do the audio again myself, because at the end of the day, it's just looking back and saying, I actually did that. Like, I actually, I did the grunt work and I got through it. So for those of you, that can bear my voice, the audio version will be out in, let's just say, the beginning of January, mid-January.
Did you have fun doing it?
I actually did. I actually learned a lot. And on top of that, here's why I did it, is because the first book I wrote, Superfans, was more of a business book, right? It was more about knowledge-based. This book was a lot about my own personal stories and my own personal experiences in my own life and the lives of the men that I work with. And there's parts in there that I don't share with very many people. And I don't share a lot of those stories. And it was like opening up the kimono. And I didn't want someone else to do that on my behalf. I wanted to do that myself because I wanted to connect with the audience and actually share it. So as I was going through this story, these stories as well, there were times, man, where I had to stop because I was getting too emotional. Or there were times where I was just like, reflecting on the book or reflecting on those stories, where I was like, wow, like this is interesting. And when you go through and you actually read your own book, it's a different experience. The one thing I realized, Nathan, and this is where I commend the work that you do from a copy perspective, is I realized it took me back to a moment when I was a kid, and I used to love writing stories. And as I was going through the book, I was just like, this is interesting because I'm actually enjoying the narration part, because I get to speak differently. I get to, tell the stories in a different manner, and I get to be myself. It's like podcasting, but in an audiobook. And it was fun. To sum it up, it was fun because I got to speak in my own voice, and that was the funnest part.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to get a copy of the book before it was even available to the public. And when I was going through it and you told me that you were going to do an audiobook version, I couldn't imagine anybody else reading it, just because of a lot of the stories in there. I don't think it would have had the same impact if you had somebody else read it. So I'm glad you made the decision to read it yourself.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm excited. So stay tuned. That book will be out soon.
Nice. Okay, so what do we have on the agenda for today's podcast episode?
Well, we're going to be talking about our minds, and our minds being our sanctuary. This is very important, especially with the events that we've gone through in 2020, and especially with how we are living today, where we're bombarded by so much stuff, and it's like a direct attack onto our brains. But more importantly, you know, is our mind our sanctuary? Is your mind, if you're listening, obviously you are listening, you're listening to this, I'm asking you the question, is your mind your sanctuary? Or is your mind the very thing that you have to protect yourself from? It's a
Mm.
very important question to ask yourself. And I want you to think back to a time, and I learn from my kids all the time, is when we're children, our minds are our sanctuaries because we can escape the realities of life. We can escape all those crappy things that we come up against, whether it's being bullied at school or whether it's challenges we're facing with our parents or whatever that is. Our minds become the safe place to go to. We can imagine a new world. We can create our new world. We can make ourselves feel better. But as we grow up to be adults, it's like the complete opposite. Our mind becomes this thing that's constantly attacking us. Our mind is where our biggest doubts are. We lose our imagination. And then we seek out other things in life, whether that's alcohol or drugs or things, to stop our mind from going into overdrive. So, this is why I think it's important because we have to get back to that point of being a kid again so that our minds are the place we go to for safety.
So one of the things that I've noticed about myself over the last year, and it's kind of a struggle. I mean, it's a lot of people are living more through their screens now. We're getting we're getting most of our interaction through Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube, and we're not actually going out and visiting the people that we love. We're communicating with them through Zoom. And one of the things that I've had trouble with is being selective about which content I let in. And I
Mhm.
noticed that the content that I let in, uh, if I'm going and turning on the TV and seeing all the latest fear mongering on the TV, I'm in a bad mood through the whole day. Or if I go onto YouTube and I see people talking about the economic impacts of the policies that we're taking, I'm pissed off for at least an hour or two after watching those YouTube videos. But if I go in and throw an Audible book on about business development or self development or uh, like you said, making your mind your sanctuary, then my attitude changes. And being conscious about which content I'm letting in, especially when you go on to Facebook and 90% of it is people who are angry and depressed, and you go on to YouTube and 90% of the content creators there are angry and depressed, and kind of justified. I get where they're coming from, but just consciously picking which content I'm absorbing, which content I'm allowing to kind of direct my thinking, and trying not to be the guy that walks into the room and just immediately drags everybody down. I got to be honest, man. As much as I feel like I have a more uh, a stronger grasp on that part of my personality, I've felt myself slipping, and I've recognized myself slipping multiple times throughout the last year.
And I don't blame you, man, because that's how a lot of us feel. And you have to realize that you're going up against billion-dollar organizations, right? And these guys have the technology and they have the means to be able to control. They're it's basically mind control. And that's what it is. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist by any means. I'm a scientist at heart. And I can tell you the neuroscience behind it that they know exactly what they're doing. They know the algorithms. They know how your mind works. They know how your eyes, the pattern that you look at the screens, they know every single thing in terms of human behavior so they can get you hooked. So we have little chance of going up against media and social media in terms of being able to control what we think. The biggest thing you can do is just avoid it altogether. And I think you mentioned, Nathan, before that you deleted the Facebook app from your phone. I think that's one of the smartest things that you can do. I think it's very important for us to be diligent in this approach. And we keep having this conversation with people, and people say, yeah, social media isn't good for you, but they continue to do it. You shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be spending your time, but they continue to do it. And it's because it's an addiction, just like everything else. And that's why the conscious brain, I talk about in the book, the conscious brain has to be the filter for your unconscious brain. It has to be.
So how do you how do you go about making your mind a safe space? Because it seems like there's so many outer influences trying to mold your worldview. I mean, that's what I do. That's what I do for a
Mhm.
living is get into my target audience and mold their worldview to get them to do the things that I want them to do. It
Mhm.
sounds nefarious and devious, but like you said, I'm not a conspiracy. I am kind of a conspiracy theorist, but only because I do this for a living. I see how easy it is to take grasp of somebody's worldview and manipulate it and get them to do what I want them to do. And now that's where 90% of our time is spent. We're not at the park playing with our kids. We're not at the beach. We're not spending time with family on the holidays. We're on our phone. We're on Facebook. We're on LinkedIn. We're on YouTube. And so the influence that maybe used to take up 40% of our time is now taking up 90% of our time. And that means that these people have even more influence over our worldviews, over our thinking, over our mind. And um, you mentioned I took Facebook off of my phone. I think everybody should do that. It was such a weight off of my shoulders when I finally broke that addiction. But what are some other things that people can do to actively create that? I hate the word safe space, but that safe space for their mind.
So the first thing to know is that your environment does impact you. So be conscious of your environment around you, your physical environment. What do you have in your physical environment? And you have to cut that off. So deleting things like your apps are important. You can even put blockers on your browsers on your computer. Shutting off the things that you don't need to have in your mind. So a lot of people play the TV in the background or other things in the background because they have to keep themselves busy and keep that mind noise going. You got to stop that, and it's what Buddhists call, have to get past the uneasiness of the boredom to actually realize the true value of life, the true pleasure of life. And that is not what we're used to. So that is one of the most important things. I'm going through an exercise today where, or I'll probably be tomorrow, is we're going to take all of our kids' toys and we're going to toss them. Like we have this room full of them. I'm seriously going to toss them because A, I'm tired of them throwing all the stuff around, but B, because I want them to use their imagination more. And these toys are not helping them in any way because it's just cluttering their mind. When you have less clutter in your mind, you can actually have space in your mind to go to. That is ultimately one of the biggest problems that we have in today's age. Is we have too much stuff in our mind. We have too many things to think about. My grandfather used to tell me this ever since I was a kid, and I didn't fully understand it. And he kept saying the simpler, and my grandfather was a very spiritual man, most spiritual man I knew in my entire life, because his father was a spiritual teacher for 50 years. He said, the simpler your life, the better your life. And I was just, for the longest time, I didn't understand it until I got older. I was like, he was so right. Like he was so bang on. Because when we get to have more pleasure in life, but here's some practical things if you can take a look at to create your sanctuary in your mind. I've talked about meditation. It's absolutely, I highly recommend you do meditation. Mindfulness practices are important. B, shut off stuff. Don't watch as much TV as you need to. Go for walks. These are just plain and simple techniques. The other one is curiosity. This is one of my favorite things is go back to being a kid again. Spend more time with your kids. Um, the creative things, enjoy things that you used to enjoy as a kid. My son said to me the other day, it was really fascinating. He said, Dad, can I always be a kid? And I said, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "When I'm older," he's like, "I know I'm going to get older, but do I have to grow up? Like, do I really have to grow up?" And I said, why are you afraid of that?" He's like, "Because I still want to read kids' books." And I said, you can still read kids' books when you're older, son. And that was just a aha moment for me. I'm like, wow, like here's a kid thinking about that. He's already wondering what his life is going to be like as an adult. So go back to those kids. I encourage you to go back and actually read kids' books, because the moments when I'm actually out of my work mode and all the stress mode is when I'm actually reading my kids' stories, because I get to experience those stories. So there's something that Einstein talked about. There's something that Buddhists talk about. We talk about imagination and curiosity. Those are two things in creativity that you need to reestablish in life. From a kid's perspective, I'm not talking about serious curiosity or serious creativity or like a business solution. I'm talking about, like the colors. Like, why are the colors the colors? Like, why do trees grow the way they do? This simple curiosity that kids have is a simple way to create that sanctuary in your mind. Emptying the cup is important. I didn't talk about it on this episode, but again, another Buddhist principle is they're saying before you do anything is to first empty the cup, because you cannot learn anything if you first do not get rid of some of the old stuff you already have, or if you already believe that you know it. So this principle of emptying the cup is really important. And I was just like, wow, I didn't understand it until I actually physically I play it out in my mind. If I go into this new situation, I physically say, okay, I'm going to pour all the stuff out of my head and allow myself to bring new stuff in. So, Nathan, these are just some simple principles. They're more philosophical, but it's important for us to understand that the less we have in our mind, the healthier our mind is.
I want to get your take on appreciation and gratitude
Hmm.
as far as this goes, because I feel like I have a friend, and I don't want to put him on blast, so I'm not going to mention him, but he is one of the few people I know that was able to keep his full-time job throughout all of this. And he works for a company that he hates, and he doesn't like his customers, and he's always complaining about how much he hates his job. And I was talking to him the other day, and I was like, dude, do you realize how fortunate you are to still have your job when so many people don't have their job? And he was complaining about the Christmas party or the Thanksgiving party that his job threw for him. And he was like, they didn't do this that they usually do, and they didn't do this that they usually do. And I looked at him, I was like, dude, it feels like you're while everybody else's garden is filling up with weeds, your garden still has roses in it, but you're complaining because they're not the shade of pink that you wished that they were. I was like, do you realize how ungrateful that seems? And we had a pretty decent conversation about it, but um being grateful for what you have, how much is gratitude work into keeping your mind the sanctuary that you need it to be?
Oh, I think it's probably the biggest part. So that was a great example, I think. And going back to your friend, here's my perspective on that. You know what? He's probably one of the unlucky ones, because he's kept his job and he's miserable with it. And so for people that don't have appreciation and gratitude, they may continue to get those same things. And it goes back to the universe will give you lessons until you figure it out. So he might have been lucky had he lost his job. Therefore, he won't have to deal with his customers and all the things that he hates to do. And he would have to find something that he finally could appreciate. But he's not going to get that lesson until he actually gets it. So, from a gratitude perspective, I think it's the simplest thing. I think what you just said is probably the foremost fundamental principle of life and for happiness. And when it comes to your mind being your sanctuary, it really comes down to gratitude. Are you thankful for the things that you have? And it's a simple principle called the contrast principle, which means that if you compare yourself to someone that is less fortunate, you can't help but feel gratitude. And when you feel that, your mind will be good. And it's not like we need to compare ourselves to other people less fortunate and put them down, but it is a way for us to be more appreciative of our life. And the reason why people aren't very happy, the reason why people's minds are consuming them rather than actually helping them out, is because they're contrasting what they don't have or what they have to what they want or what they don't want, and from a negative perspective, not from the right perspective. And it goes back to my mom, who's staying with us for a month, and she taught us this. And my mom's like a hard ass, right? She's a tough woman. Um, and I'm saying this quietly because I don't want her to hear, but she taught us always appreciate what we have, because she came from poverty and she knows what it's like to have nothing. And we learned that when we went to India. But it is one of the basic principles, is gratitude can definitely help you. I think, to wrap this episode up, Nathan, is we have to get back to this point. We, especially as men, is we have to get back to this point of our minds being able to be our sanctuary, where we go to for safety, because there is no other place. There is no other place. If we can't be safe in our own minds, where else are we going to go to? Right. And this is very important, because as leaders of our family, as men in our household, as husbands, as fathers, think about this. If we can't be happy in our own minds, how are we going to teach our children to be happy in their own minds? That is very tough to do.
Mhm.
And it's very important for us to do.
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier, walking into the room and being the guy that brings everybody down. Um, we maybe don't realize how much influence we have over other people. We've talked about how other people might influence us, but you talking about, if you can't do it for yourself, how can you expect your kids to learn these behaviors? How can you expect your team to learn these behaviors? As easily as we're influenced, we're also going out and influencing others. So if we don't take an active role in safeguarding our mind and our thinking, we're just passing along mind viruses as we go. A weird way to end the show. Did you have
That's a
any?
conspiracy theory.
I know,
Forget,
right?
forget, forget about the COVID vaccine. We got mind viruses out there now.
All right. It's the COVID-21. All right, man. We kind of went a little bit all over the place today, but I feel like it's an important topic, and I think that now more than ever in these troubling times, it's something that we should be concerned with, and taking an active role in safeguarding our thinking processes. If people want more of this podcast, where can they go to get more episodes?
I don't know if they want more after listening to this one, but if you do, you got a mind virus. And you got to check out YouTubeformen.com or mailpodcast.com.
Awesome, Pradeep. Thank you so much, man. Until next time, we will catch you later.